I'll give you $200,000 if you serve me in Chinese. The whole restaurant froze. The sound of forks and glasses stopped at once. The pianist lifted his hands off the keys. Jasmine Carter stood still, holding a silver tray against her chest. The man who spoke sat at the center table. Richard Blackwell, 52, real estate developer, the kind of customer no one ever corrected. You heard me, Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair. 200,000. All cash. You serve our table in Chinese for the rest of the night. Jasmine looked at him directly. Why? He smiled. Because you said you studied languages. I want to see how true that is. Think of it as a test. The three Japanese investors sitting with him looked uncomfortable. The oldest, Hiroshi, adjusted his glasses. Richard, maybe this isn't appropriate. Richard waved him off. Relax, Hiroshi. It's harmless. She gets a chance to win 200 grand. Nobody loses. Jasmine didn't move. The tray stayed balanced in her hands. The bills that Richard had dropped onto it were new, crisp, and ugly. You look smart, he continued. Say something in Chinese. I'll start counting the money. Jasmine didn't answer. Her face stayed calm. People nearby had started paying attention. Two waiters behind the bar, a couple at another table whispering, someone quietly recording on their phone. If I refuse, she asked evenly, what happens? Richard grinned. Nothing. You keep doing your job, and we all go back to dinner. But you're not stupid. You know what this is? It's an opportunity. You mean a performance. He chuckled. Call it whatever you want. You win, you walk out richer than everyone in this room. And if I lose? Richard leaned forward on his elbows. Then you apologize. Here, in front of everyone. Admit you wasted our time. That's fair. Kenji, the second investor, spoke quietly. Richard, stop. This doesn't look good. Richard didn't look at him. You're too polite, Kenji. People love a show. Jasmine's voice stayed flat. You said $200,000. Cash. Tonight. Exactly. Then I'll do it. For a second, Richard stared, as if he hadn't expected her to agree. You're serious? I don't joke about money. He gave a short laugh. All right. I like your attitude. I'm not doing this for your approval. The room stayed silent. Even the servers by the wall stopped, pretending to work. Jasmine set the tray down on the table between them. The money didn't move. Richard picked up his champagne glass. Here's what happens. You'll get the special Chinese menu. You'll describe 5 dishes in Chinese, complete sentences, not random words. If it's convincing, you win. If it isn't, you lose. Jasmine looked straight at him. And you'll pay me here, in front of everyone. I already said I would. Good. Then we have a deal. Hiroshi tried again. Ms. Carter, you don't need to. It's fine, she said, cutting him off without raising her voice. He wants a test. He'll get one. Richard smirked. I like that confidence. Confidence doesn't make anyone better than anyone else, she said. Neither does education, he shot back. Then this should be simple for you. The exchange was short but sharp. People could hear every word now. The hum of quiet conversations had stopped completely. Richard turned to the waiter near the bar. Bring me the Chinese menu. The long one, the Shanghai edition. The waiter hesitated. Sir, that menu has over 40 items with regional names. It's not easy to. That's the point, Richard interrupted. Let's make this fair. Jasmine didn't blink. So 5 dishes in Chinese. Full descriptions. If I succeed, I take $200,000. If I fail, I kneel and apologize. Richard nodded slowly. Exactly. Kenji whispered to Hiroshi in Japanese, but neither of them smiled. Jasmine rested both hands on the back of an empty chair. You should know something. Once I start, you don't stop me until I'm done. Richard laughed again, trying to keep control of the moment. You talk like you have leverage. I don't need leverage, she said. Just your word. My word's enough, he said, though his tone had shifted. Do we understand each other? Yes. You made yourself very clear. The waiter came back with a heavy, leather-bound menu and placed it on the table. Richard tapped it with a finger. That's the one. You still want to go through with this? Jasmine didn't answer right away. She looked at the menu, then back at him. You're sure you want to? He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? You'll find out, she said. Her tone wasn't angry, not loud, just plain, steady, and certain. Richard tried to laugh again, but it came out thinner. All right then. Gentlemen, get ready. We're about to witness something unforgettable. The investors said nothing. Jasmine straightened her sleeves, lifted the tray from the table, and said calmly, "Let's begin." Richard raised his glass once more, forcing a grin. "Let the lesson start." She didn't move. No lesson. Just work. The sound of her voice carried clearly through the room, calm, level, without fear. Every person watching understood that whatever was about to happen next wouldn't be a game. The waiter placed the thick Chinese menu on the table. Everyone watched. Richard touched the cover with one hand, smiling like he owned the room. "Here we go," he said. 40 dishes, complicated names, long descriptions. Let's see how confident our waitress really is. Jasmine didn't move. She looked at him once, then at the investors. "You said I'll serve you in Chinese. That means the entire service. I'll start when you're ready to order." Richard gave a short laugh. "That's adorable. You think this is about service. It's not. It's about proving a point." "What point?" Jasmine asked. "That people should stay in their lane," Richard replied, leaning forward. "There's no shame in knowing your place. The world works because people like you follow orders from people like me." Hiroshi frowned. "Richard, that's enough." "No, it's fine," Jasmine said quietly. "I understand him perfectly." Richard raised his glass again. "Good. Let's begin. You have 5 minutes to prepare. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll be generous." Jasmine didn't take the menu. "I don't need preparation." That stopped him for a moment. "You don't." "I said I'll serve in Chinese, not rehearse for a talent show." Someone at a nearby table chuckled. The laughter spread, not at her, but at him. Richard's smile tightened. He turned to the waiter. "Bring a new tray, a bottle of champagne, and 4 glasses. We'll make this official." The waiter nodded and left quickly. Jasmine stayed silent, watching him. Richard kept talking, trying to sound relaxed. "You see, gentlemen, this is what happens when people start believing they're smarter than they are. They think education or attitude can replace class." Kenji spoke sharply. "Richard, stop saying that. You're not helping yourself." Richard ignored him. "Look, she's been quiet for too long. Maybe she's realizing what she agreed to." "I'm realizing something, yes," Jasmine said. He grinned. "And what's that?" "That this is exactly the kind of moment people remember for the rest of their lives." His smirk faded for a second, but he quickly laughed again. "You sound like a movie script." "It's not a movie. You made a bet in public. You'll honor it." The waiter returned with a new tray and glasses. He set them down gently, eyes lowered. Nobody wanted to be part of this, but no one dared leave. Richard gestured at the menu. "Go ahead. Pick any dish. Impress us." Jasmine opened the menu slowly, scanning the pages without expression. The columns were full of Chinese characters, English translations, and small chef's notes. She stopped at one page, then another, then closed it. "I'll explain 5 dishes," she said. "Full details. Ingredients, region, preparation method." Richard crossed his arms. "Do whatever makes you feel comfortable." She nodded. "Before I begin, let me ask something. Which of you speaks Mandarin?" The question caught the table off guard. Hiroshi blinked. "I speak a little, mostly for business." Kenji shook his head. "Only basics." Yuki, who had been silent, finally spoke. "I'm fluent." Richard looked surprised. "You are?" Yuki nodded calmly. 10 years in Taiwan. My Mandarin is fine." Richard's smile returned, but it was tighter now. "Perfect. Then we'll have an expert judge. That makes this even more interesting." "Interesting is one word for it," Jasmine said. Richard leaned back. "Are we ready?" "Yes," she said simply. He raised his glass again. "Then let's begin." The restaurant was completely silent now. The pianist sat motionless. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling lights. Jasmine stood straight, hands resting lightly on the tray. She looked directly at Yuki. "If I make a mistake, please correct me." Yuki nodded once. "I will." She turned to Richard. "You said 5 dishes. I'll start with the first." Richard gestured for her to continue. She began to speak, not loudly, not dramatically, just clear, steady, fluent Mandarin. Everyone in the room turned. The words came fast but precise. Yuki's head lifted slightly, eyes narrowing with concentration. Richard interrupted after 10 seconds. "Wait, is that real Chinese, Or are you making sounds? Yuki raised a hand. Be quiet. Jasmine kept going, describing ingredients, methods, temperatures, origins. When she paused, Yuki translated for the others. She's explaining the history of Sichuan cuisine, the balance of flavors, the regional terminology. Everything she said is correct. Richard's fingers tapped the table. All right, she learned a paragraph. Anyone can memorize lines. Jasmine ignored him. She switched to another dish, her tone unchanged. Yuki nodded again and again, occasionally whispering short notes to the other investors. The silence grew heavier. Customers who had been pretending to eat were now openly watching. Richard's voice rose slightly. I still don't know if that's perfect Mandarin or just some trick. Yuki turned to him, his voice sharp. It's perfect Mandarin. You should stop talking. For the first time that night, Richard had nothing to say. Jasmine looked at him briefly, then continued to the fifth dish. Her pronunciation stayed precise, her rhythm natural. When she finished, she closed the menu and said, "That completes your request." No one spoke. Yuki looked at her and said in English, "That was flawless. Not just fluent, but academic-level precision." Hiroshi exhaled slowly. Incredible. Kenji sat back in his chair, shaking his head. I can't believe what I just heard. Richard finally tried to recover. Maybe she memorized it. Maybe she practiced for this exact menu. Jasmine turned to him. Then you can ask for more. Choose anything. I can continue all night if you'd like. He didn't respond. His mouth opened, then closed again. Jasmine placed the menu back on the table. You said you wanted a show. It's done. $200,000. Richard stared at her, silent for a long time. Then he laughed again, but the sound was hollow. You really think this proves something? Yes, she said. It proves that you misjudged me. The investors didn't speak. None of them touched their glasses. The air in the room was heavy and still. Richard looked around and saw every table watching. Every phone was pointed at him now, not her. He forced another laugh. Fine, we'll settle this properly. You already did, Jasmine said. Now it's time to pay. 3 years earlier, Jasmine Carter was not a waitress. She was Dr. Jasmine Carter, 30 years old, a full-time lecturer at Columbia University and one of the youngest scholars in computational linguistics. Her office had been small but organized, shelves of books on phonetics, syntax, and Chinese dialectology. She used to stay late grading papers or talking with students about tonal variations. Back then, everything in her life made sense. That ended with a phone call at 2:37 a.m. Miss Carter? This is St. Luke's Hospital. Your mother has had a stroke. You should come immediately. She remembered every sound from that night. The rain, the cab driver's silence, the beeping machines in the ICU. Her mother, Dorothy Carter, 58, lay unconscious, her right side paralyzed. The doctor's words were direct. She's stable for now, but recovery will take months, possibly years. She'll need therapy, medication, and constant care. Jasmine asked the first question that came to mind. How much will that cost? The doctor didn't hesitate. Between $7,000 and $9,000 a month, depending on treatment response. She nodded slowly. Thank you. Her mother had been everything. A retired librarian, kind, stubborn, proud. She had raised Jasmine alone, always reminding her, education is the one thing no one can take from you. Within 2 months, the savings were gone. Insurance refused to cover extended rehabilitation. Jasmine appealed twice, lost both times. She sold her car, then her jewelry, then her apartment in Morningside Heights. She kept teaching as long as she could, pretending everything was fine. Her students noticed her exhaustion, but she still showed up, still lectured on the structure of tonal languages. When her mother's condition worsened again, she took unpaid leave, then extended leave. Then there was no position left to return to. Bills kept arriving, one envelope after another. Balance due. Urgent. Final notice. The last call from the hospital's billing office came while she was eating cold noodles at her kitchen counter. Dr. Carter, unless we receive payment by the end of the week, we'll have to suspend part of the treatment plan. She put the phone down and sat still for a long time. Then she looked at her mother, asleep on the couch, her left hand twitching slightly. That night, Jasmine made a decision. She walked into a staffing agency the next morning. The woman at the desk smiled politely. "How can I help you?" "I need work. Anything that pays quickly." "Do you have a resume?" "Yes, but it won't help you much." The woman read it anyway. After a minute, she looked up, confused. "You have a PhD in linguistics from MIT?" "I used to. Now I need a paycheck." The woman hesitated, then typed something. "There's an opening at the Prestige Club. Evenings, full-time. It's hard work, but the pay is steady. I'll take it." She started that same week. The first day, she carried trays that felt heavier than they should have. Her hands shook from lack of sleep, not from weakness, but from the weight of change. By the third week, she learned every table's number, every regular's favorite drink. She listened more than she spoke. Most customers never looked at her face. Occasionally, she overheard conversations about investments, art auctions, politics, men talking loudly about money they would never miss. She served their wine and kept her thoughts quiet. During breaks, she sat near the kitchen and read research papers on her phone. She still had access to academic databases through an old account. Sometimes she replied to old colleagues' emails, pretending she was just taking time off. No one at the Prestige Club knew who she had been. They just called her Jazz. She never corrected them. Months passed. Her mother's therapy continued. The bills didn't stop. Jasmine worked double shifts, sometimes leaving the restaurant past midnight, sleeping only a few hours before helping her mother with exercises. Her life had shrunk to two places, the clinic and the restaurant. Every day looked the same until the night she served table 17. Richard Blackwell walked in with 3 Japanese investors, loud, confident, the kind of arrogance that filled a room before he spoke. Jasmine didn't pay attention at first. She poured champagne, set down plates, and moved on. Then, one of the investors mentioned business in Shanghai. Richard joked about how all those Asian languages sound the same. The men laughed politely. Jasmine heard it while refilling glasses, but she didn't react. Later that night, as she cleared plates, Richard looked up at her name tag. "Carter, that's not Chinese, is it?" "No, sir. You look smart. What did you study before this?" She answered honestly. "Linguistics." He laughed. "That's cute. So you can say hello in 10 languages, I bet." "I can manage a few more than that," she said. "Oh yeah? Which ones?" "English, Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese, French, Spanish, Korean, Italian, and Arabic." Richard laughed again, louder this time. "Sure you can. Everyone says that on job applications." She didn't argue. She just nodded and kept clearing the plates. That was the first night he noticed her. The next few times he visited, he made comments, small, cutting, disguised as jokes. "You don't look like a language expert," or "Bet you learned all that from TV shows." Jasmine never reacted. Until tonight. The night he dropped $200,000 on her tray and turned humiliation into entertainment. She had thought about walking away. She had considered it for one long second. But something inside her said no. Not this time. She had been quiet for 3 years. She had swallowed every insult, every reminder that people like Richard thought they could buy dignity. Not tonight. That's why she had looked him straight in the eyes and said the words clearly. "I accept your offer." The manager of the Prestige Club arrived within minutes, walking fast, but trying not to look nervous. His name was Daniel Lee, mid-40s, always polite, always afraid of the wrong kind of attention. "Mr. Blackwell," he said carefully, "is there a problem tonight?" Richard pointed at Jasmine without even turning his head. "No problem. We're having a little test. Bring me the Chinese menu, the long one with the regional dishes. I want her to read from it." Daniel hesitated. "That menu isn't usually for public use. It's for guests from Shanghai or Beijing." Richard interrupted. "Exactly. That's the point. Bring it here." Daniel's eyes flicked toward Jasmine. "Miss Carter, is this necessary?" Jasmine kept her voice calm. He made a public offer. "I accepted. $200,000. Richard smirked. "See? Everyone's clear. Let's not waste time." Daniel looked uneasy. "Mr. Blackwell, this isn't really..." Richard cut him off again. "You can go now, Daniel. Just bring the menu." The manager gave Jasmine a brief look, something between sympathy and disbelief, then left. Richard turned to the investors. "You see how they are? Always quick to talk, never ready to back it up. Kenji said quietly, "You're enjoying this too much." "Of course I am," Richard said. "This is education. The world runs on people who understand their limits." Jasmine spoke evenly. "You keep talking about limits. You might discover yours tonight." Richard laughed. "That sounds like a threat." "It's just a statement," she said. Yuki, the quiet one, watched her closely but didn't speak. The waiter returned first, carrying a tray with glasses and a new bottle of champagne. Behind him, Daniel came back with a thick leather-bound menu and placed it on the table. Richard clapped his hands once. "Perfect. Let's make this official." He looked around. "Everyone, pay attention. $200,000 on the line. Let's see if our language expert can earn it." A few customers stopped pretending to eat. Some whispered. Phones were already recording again. Jasmine didn't flinch. "You should confirm the rules before we start." Richard leaned back. "Rules are simple. You describe 5 dishes in Chinese. Not words, not phrases. Full sentences. If you sound convincing, I pay. If you fail, you kneel here and apologize." "Agreed." "Agreed," Jasmine said. "But I'll add one thing." Richard narrowed his eyes. "What thing?" "If I can also explain the origin and preparation of each dish in fluent Chinese, you double the bet to $400,000. The table went silent. Even Daniel looked up. Richard blinked, caught off guard. "You're serious?" "You wanted a real test," she said. "Let's make it worth your time." Hiroshi exhaled. "Richard, stop this. You're going too far." Richard shook his head. "She thinks she can win? Fine. 400,000. "Say it clearly," Jasmine said. $400,000 if I succeed." Richard nodded. 400,000. "But when you fail, you'll work a month for free." "I'll make sure of it." "Fine," she said. "We'll both keep our word." Kenji whispered something in Japanese, probably a warning, but Richard ignored him. He leaned back again, the confidence returning to his voice. "All right, Dr. Waitress, show us what you've got." The waiter poured champagne for everyone, hands trembling slightly. Jasmine didn't touch her glass. She rested one hand on the edge of the table and waited. "Before I start," she said, "I need to know one thing. Which of you can actually understand Mandarin?" Hiroshi said, "I speak a little. Business level only." Kenji shook his head. "None." Yuki said quietly, "Fluent." Jasmine nodded. "Good. Then you'll confirm the accuracy. The rest can watch." Richard laughed, but the sound was forced. "Fluent, huh? Then we got ourselves a proper judge." Yuki didn't respond. He just looked at Jasmine, eyes steady. Richard pointed at the menu. "Go on then. Pick a page. Start reading." Jasmine opened the menu and scanned it quickly. She recognized several dishes immediately. Not because she'd worked in a restaurant, but because she'd written academic papers about their linguistic origins. "I'll start with 5 dishes from different regions," she said. "Whatever you want," Richard replied. "Just try not to embarrass yourself." She didn't answer. She kept reading for another few seconds, then looked up. "I'm ready." The restaurant went completely silent. Richard raised his glass, pretending confidence. "Gentlemen, get ready. This is going to be fun." She stood straight, set the menu on the table, and said evenly, "I'll speak now." Richard leaned back, smirking. "Go ahead. Impress us." Jasmine took a breath and began speaking Mandarin. Not loudly, not like a show, but clear, natural, and confident. The tone was neutral, precise, unmistakably fluent. Within 10 seconds, Yuki's eyebrows lifted slightly. He leaned forward, listening more carefully. Richard's smirk faded just a little. She continued, describing ingredients, the texture of the sauce, the meaning behind the name of the dish. When she paused to move to the next one, Yuki said quietly in English, "Every word is correct." Kenji looked at him. "You're sure?" Yuki nodded. "Perfect Mandarin. Not memorized. She understands every word." Richard forced a laugh. She rehearsed. "Anyone can memorize a script." Jasmine turned to him. "Would you like me to continue in Cantonese instead?" He frowned. "What? You said this is about proof. I can continue in another dialect if you'd like." The color drained slightly from his face. He looked at the investors, then at the watching crowd. Yuki said in a low voice, "Mr. Blackwell, she's not pretending." Richard didn't answer. He just stared at her. Jasmine closed the menu slowly. That's one dish. For left. Shall I continue? No one replied. She waited a moment, then said quietly, I'll take that as a yes. No one moved. The air inside the Prestige Club felt heavier than usual. Even the waiters had stopped pretending to work. Every sound seemed distant, every breath audible. Jasmine stood beside the table, holding the menu in one hand. The confidence in her posture was quiet, not dramatic. She didn't smile, didn't play to the crowd. She just began speaking again, Mandarin, fluid and exact, her tone consistent and calm. Yuki listened closely. The words were clean, the pronunciation perfect, the grammar academic but natural. He had worked in Taiwan for a decade and knew how rare that level of fluency was. She described the first dish, mapo tofu, the Sichuan specialty, explaining its balance between chili and pepper, the preparation method, the type of tofu used, and the cultural meaning behind the flavor contrast. She named the regional variations, the dialect terms, and even the origin of the chef's name that inspired the title. Richard blinked, trying to follow, but all he heard was sound. Yuki translated for the table. She's explaining the etymology of the word mapo, and she's correct. It means pockmarked old woman, a historical reference to the dish's creator. Kenji looked stunned. She's teaching a lecture, not just reading. She's doing both, Yuki said quietly. Richard laughed once, but it came out dry. So, she memorized the menu. Big deal. Jasmine didn't react. She turned the page and began again, describing Peking duck in full detail. The marination time, the temperature of the oven, the slicing technique, even the symbolism of the crispy skin representing prosperity. Yuki kept nodding. Every technical word is correct. Her tones are precise. Richard tapped the table with his fingers. I still don't believe it. Jasmine turned her head toward him. Would you like me to continue in Cantonese instead? The shift in her tone made him pause. Cantonese? Yes, she said, and without waiting, she switched languages smoothly. Her pronunciation changed instantly. Softer consonants, different rhythm, authentic Hong Kong accent. She explained how dim sum culture developed during the Qing dynasty and how tea houses became social centers of trade and discussion. Yuki whispered, That's flawless Cantonese. Hiroshi stared. This is unbelievable. Jasmine continued, switching back to Mandarin for the third dish, Xiaolong Bao, the Shanghai soup dumpling. She explained the 18 folds, their symbolic meaning, and the gelatinization technique that turns solid broth into liquid during steaming. Yuki translated in English for Richard, who sat motionless. She said the number of folds, 18, symbolizes wealth and longevity. She's right. Every Chinese chef knows that. The crowd around them had grown. Waiters, customers, even the bartenders stood still, watching. No one was eating anymore. Phones recorded from multiple angles. Richard finally said, You've made your point. Jasmine answered without raising her voice. I haven't finished yet. She turned to the fourth dish, Kung Pao chicken. The words came precise, the tones crisp. She detailed its adaptation from Sichuan to Western restaurants, the difference between authentic and Americanized versions, and the literal meaning of Gong Bao Ji Ding as Palace Guardian's chicken. Yuki nodded again. She's accurate. Completely. Richard muttered under his breath. Impossible. Jasmine finished with the fifth dish, sweet and sour fish. She described its origins in Jiangsu province and explained the linguistic structure of the phrase tang suyu, breaking down how tone changes in tang and siyu shift the meaning subtly in regional dialects. When she stopped, there was no applause, just silence. The kind that only happens when everyone realizes they've seen something they can't explain. She closed the menu and looked directly at Richard. That completes the 5 dishes. Yuki spoke quietly. Everything she said was correct. Every word. Hiroshi leaned back. This woman is not a waitress. Jasmine replied softly, Tonight I am. But that doesn't mean I don't know who I was before. Richard tried to recover. You could have practiced this. Maybe you used to study this specific menu. No, Jasmine said. But I did study the people who wrote menus like this. I wrote papers on how language shapes perception in food culture. It's what I used to teach before life happened. Kenji looked confused. You're saying you were a professor? Yes, at Columbia. I taught Chinese linguistics for 6 years. The crowd whispered. Richard laughed nervously, looking around the room. Sure you did. Jasmine didn't move. You can look it up. I'm not lying. But you already made your judgment before asking. Yuki said quietly. She's telling the truth. I recognize her name. I've read one of her papers. Richard turned toward him. That's not possible. Yuki didn't blink. It is. Her work on regional dialect patterns in Beijing and Shanghai. Published 5 years ago. I remember it because it was cited in a conference I attended in Taipei. The silence returned, sharper than before. Jasmine placed the menu back on the table. You wanted a show? You got one. $200,000. Richard looked at the money still on the tray. His hands didn't move. The investors were no longer watching her. They were watching him. Jasmine stood still, her voice steady. You said I'd earn it in front of everyone. I did. Now it's your turn to honor your word. Richard didn't answer. He looked around and saw cameras, faces, and the weight of 100 silent witnesses. Mr. Blackwell, Hiroshi said, his tone flat. Pay her. Richard's hand twitched. This isn't over. It is, Jasmine said, because you made it public. For the first time all night, Richard had nothing left to say. The moment felt longer than it really was. Richard tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. His face had lost its color, the grin he always wore gone. Jasmine stood in front of him, calm, composed, the same way she used to stand in front of classrooms full of students. You asked who I am, she said. I'll answer now. Richard leaned forward, trying to sound confident again. You're a waitress at my table. That's who you are. She shook her head once. Not exactly. My name is Dr. Jasmine Carter, Ph.D. in computational linguistics from MIT. I taught Chinese linguistics at Columbia University for 6 years. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Someone near the bar whispered, Did she just say doctor? Richard's voice came out strained. That's impossible. It's not, Yuki said evenly. She's telling the truth. I read her paper on dialect patterns in Beijing. It was published 5 years ago. Kenji turned his head toward Richard. You didn't check who you were insulting before you started this? Richard ignored him. Even if that's true, why would a woman with a PhD work here? Because life doesn't ask permission before it collapses, Jasmine said. My mother had a stroke. Medical bills destroyed everything I had. This job paid faster than waiting for the university to open another position. She didn't raise her voice, but every word landed clearly. The investors listened without interrupting. Even the staff behind the bar stood still. Richard reached for his glass but didn't drink. You could have told me that before this. Would it have mattered? She asked. You already decided what kind of person I was. Kenji leaned toward Yuki and spoke quietly in Japanese, but the tone made it clear he wasn't amused. Jasmine continued. You used $200,000 to see if I would let you humiliate me. I used your challenge to remind you that respect isn't something you can buy. Richard tried to laugh, but didn't sound real. You talk like you're giving a speech. No, she said, just facts. Yuki looked around the room. You realize everyone's recording this, right? Richard turned sharply. They have no right to film me. Kenji said, You made it public, Richard. You turned it into a spectacle. Richard slammed his palm against the table. The glasses rattled. Enough. No, Jasmine said quietly. Not yet. She pointed to the money still stacked neatly on the tray. That's what you owe me. Richard stared at it. You think you deserve it. I earned it under your rules. Hiroshi's voice came calm, but cold. Mr. Blackwell, pay her. Now. Richard hesitated, looking from one investor to the next. You're not serious. Yuki said, completely serious. You made an offer. She met your conditions. Pay her. The room stayed silent. Richard's hand shook slightly as he reached for the bills. He began counting them one by one, the sound of paper on metal echoing louder than it should have. Jasmine watched quietly, no triumph on her face, just calm certainty. When he finished, he pushed the stack toward her. There, 200,000. She didn't touch it. Any apology? What? You said I'd have to apologize in front of everyone if I failed. You failed, not me. You owe the same thing. The crowd murmured. A few people near the entrance nodded. Richard stared at her, jaw tight. You're out of your mind. No, Jasmine said. Just consistent. Kenji's voice cut through the air. Do it. Right now. Richard looked at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. Yuki said flatly. We are. Either you apologize or you'll regret what comes next. The pause stretched too long. Then Richard stood up abruptly, glass in hand, and spoke louder than before. Fine. I apologize. Happy now. Jasmine shook her head. Louder, so everyone hears. He slammed the glass on the table, voice breaking. I apologize for my ignorance. Nobody clapped. Nobody laughed. The sound of his own words filled the room and stayed there. Jasmine nodded once. Now we're done. She picked up the tray, set it aside, and started to walk away. Richard's voice followed her, shaky but angry. You think this changes anything? She stopped and looked back at him. For you, maybe not. For everyone watching, it changes everything. The investors stood. Hiroshi left first, saying nothing. Kenji followed, his expression blank. Yuki stayed a moment longer, then looked at Richard and said, You just destroyed your own reputation. When they were gone, the entire restaurant remained silent. Richard sat back down, eyes on the untouched champagne. His hands were trembling. Behind him, Jasmine walked through the hallway toward the staff door. One waiter whispered, You okay? She nodded. I'm fine. The door closed behind her. Out in the dining hall, people started talking again, voices low, uncertain whether they just witnessed revenge or justice. The video appeared online less than 12 hours later. A guest at the Prestige Club had recorded everything from the moment Richard said the words, $200,000 if you serve me in Chinese. By morning, the clip was everywhere, Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, news sites. The headline read, Manhattan Tycoon tries to humiliate Waitress. Gets destroyed in 3 languages. By noon, it had over 5 million views. Jasmine didn't see it until she got to the clinic to check on her mother. The nurse at the front desk smiled awkwardly. You're trending, she said quietly. Jasmine frowned. What do you mean? The nurse handed her phone over. The video was already muted, but recognizable. The scene showed Richard slamming the table, Jasmine standing straight, speaking in fluent Mandarin, the investors stunned. The comment section was chaos. Thousands of people calling it the best public karma ever caught on camera. Others wanted to know who she was. Do you know him personally? The nurse asked. No, Jasmine said. He was just another customer. She turned the phone off and handed it back. Please don't show my mother. She doesn't need more stress. When she entered her mother's room, Dorothy was sitting up, reading. Her voice was weaker now, but her eyes were clear. You didn't come home last night, she said softly. I worked late. Her mother looked at her. You look calm. What happened? Nothing important. Just work. Dorothy studied her daughter for a long second, then smiled faintly. You sound like your father when he lied about everything being fine. Jasmine sat beside her. Then I guess I'll learn from him. She stayed until noon, then left to go to her evening shift. On the way to the restaurant, her phone didn't stop vibrating. Unknown numbers, messages from journalists, interview requests, university emails. By the time she arrived, Daniel, the manager, was waiting by the door. He looked nervous. Jasmine, we need to talk. She nodded. I know. The video. It's everywhere. The owner saw it. We're getting calls from reporters, from business people, from the investors' offices. They all want to confirm the story. Then confirm it, she said. Daniel looked shocked. You're not worried? No. Everything in that video was real. He didn't argue. For what it's worth, he said quietly. Everyone here's proud of you. You handled them better than anyone I've ever seen. Thanks, she said. But I didn't do it to make a point. I just did what was right. That night, she didn't have to work. The restaurant was overrun with calls and cameras waiting outside. Daniel sent everyone home early. At midnight, she finally checked her email. There were dozens of messages. One caught her attention. Invitation, Columbia University Department of Linguistics. She opened it. Dear Dr. Carter, we saw the recent incident circulating online and wanted to reach out personally. Many of us remember your work and your teaching. The department has an upcoming lecture series on cross-cultural communication, and we would be honored if you would return as a guest speaker. We will compensate you for your time. Please let us know if you're available. Jasmine read it twice before closing her laptop. She didn't respond right away. She just sat there in silence, staring at the same hands that had once written lectures and were now carrying trays. For the first time in years, the thought of walking back into a classroom didn't feel impossible. The next morning, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Carter?" "Yes." "This is Yuki Sato." She hesitated. "Mr. Sato?" "Yes. I want to thank you again for last night. What you did was extraordinary. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You reminded everyone what real competence looks like." "I didn't plan it," she said. "I know. That's why it worked." He paused, then continued. "My company is expanding to the United States. We're creating a new department focused on intercultural relations and linguistic integration for international clients. I'd like to offer you the position of director." Jasmine didn't answer right away. "Why me?" "Because people like you don't pretend to be qualified. You either are or you're not. And you are." She exhaled slowly. "You don't even know if I want the job." "Then think about it," Yuki said. "The offer will still be there." When the call ended, Jasmine sat quietly in her small apartment. Her roommate peeked out of her room. "You're the woman from the video, aren't you?" Jasmine looked at her. "Apparently." The roommate grinned. "You're famous. Half the city's talking about you." "Fame fades fast," Jasmine said. "I just want peace." "Still," the roommate said, "you made him look like an idiot. That's something." Jasmine gave a small nod. "Maybe, but that wasn't the goal." That night, she turned off her phone, made tea, and stood by the window. Outside, the city kept moving, taxis, noise, lights, people rushing somewhere. She looked down at her hands again. They were steady now. 3 years ago, she had lost everything that gave her life direction. Now, she wasn't sure what would come next. But for the first time since her mother's stroke, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She felt like she was starting over. By the end of the week, Richard Blackwell's name was on every business site in New York, but not the way he was used to. The same investors who once filled his schedule stopped answering his calls. The video of his outburst at the Prestige Club had reached 20 million views. Every version of it had captions in different languages. Chinese news outlets called it a lesson in respect. American talk shows labeled it instant karma at fine dining. On Monday morning, his company's PR team quit. By Wednesday, 2 banks froze his accounts pending review of reputational risk. The $200 million partnership with the Tanaka Yamamoto Group was officially canceled. A short public statement from their Tokyo office read, "We cannot proceed with an organization whose leadership does not align with our values." Inside his office, Richard threw his phone across the room and yelled, "It was a damn joke." His assistant didn't answer. She quietly collected her things and left. Calls from journalists came every hour. He refused to comment. One headline on Thursday read, "Blackwell Properties in Crisis After Viral Racism Scandal." Clients pulled out of projects. Contractors stopped showing up. His company's board demanded an emergency meeting. Within 2 weeks, he was removed as CEO. At home, things weren't better. His wife packed her clothes in silence. "You made us a joke," she said before walking out. His adult son sent him a message that said only, "Don't call me." By the 3rd week, the apartment was half empty. The luxury cars were gone. The doorman didn't look at him anymore. Meanwhile, Jasmine's life shifted in the opposite direction. Yuki's offer became official. Director of Intercultural Relations, Tanaka Yamamoto International. Salary, $180,000 a year, plus full medical coverage for her mother. When she signed the contract, Yuki said, "I don't hire people for what they survived. I hire them for what they learned from it." "I learned that dignity isn't negotiable," she said. He smiled slightly. "That's exactly why we want you." 2 months later, she and her mother moved into a spacious apartment on the Upper West Side. Her mother had a private nurse and physical therapist. Dorothy's speech was still slow, but she smiled more now. "You found your way back," she said one evening. Something like that. At work, Jasmine managed a team of translators and cultural consultants. She helped design training programs for executives across Asia and the U.S. Every meeting she led was calm, precise, and professional. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody underestimated her twice. Sometimes, when she passed the glass walls of her office and saw her nameplate, Dr. Jasmine Carter, director, she paused for a second, not to feel proud, but to remember how easily life can flip. One afternoon, she received another email from Columbia University. Dr. Carter, we would like to invite you to deliver the keynote lecture at our international conference on linguistics and society. She read it carefully, then smiled. Yes, she said out loud, alone in her office. I'll go. That same week, a reporter reached out for comment about Richard. His company had filed for bankruptcy. Creditors were seizing his remaining properties. Rumors said he was living in a rented apartment in Queens, working as a consultant for a used car dealership owned by an old friend. Jasmine didn't respond to the reporter. On Friday, she gave her first guest lecture back at Columbia. The hall was full, students, professors, cameras. She began the way she always used to, calm, direct, without theatrics. Power isn't permanent, she said. It changes hands every day. The question is what you do when you have it, and how you behave when you lose it. After the lecture, students crowded around her. Some asked for advice, others for photos. One young woman said, "That video changed how I see myself at work. Thank you for not staying quiet." Jasmine smiled. Sometimes silence keeps the peace. Other times, it protects the wrong people. You have to know the difference. When she left the campus that evening, the sky was clear. Her mother was waiting for her at home, dinner already warm on the table. Dorothy asked, "How was it?" "Good," Jasmine said. It felt like coming home. Later that night, on the other side of the city, Richard watched a local business segment on TV. Jasmine appeared for a few seconds, introducing herself as Dr. Carter, speaking about cultural communication in international markets. He muted the television and stared at the screen. The room was small, the walls bare. He whispered to himself, "It should have been nothing, just a game." Then he turned off the TV. Jasmine, at that same moment, was writing notes for her next project, a program connecting language education with corporate ethics. She titled it simply, "Respect as Currency." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was fighting to survive. She was finally living the life she had earned. 6 months passed. The video had stopped trending, but the story never disappeared. It became one of those rare moments that people remembered without needing to check the date. Jasmine Carter's life looked completely different now. She worked from an office on the 47th floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. The door carried her name in bold letters, Dr. Jasmine Carter, Director of Intercultural Relations. Every morning, she arrived early. Her team respected her, her clients trusted her, and her mother was recovering steadily at home with full-time care. She didn't talk about the incident anymore. It wasn't part of her daily life, but everyone around her knew who she was. When she spoke at conferences, someone always mentioned it. "You're the woman from the video, right?" She would nod once. "Yes, that was me." Then she'd change the subject. Her focus was the work, building programs to teach companies how to communicate across languages and cultures without arrogance or ignorance. One afternoon, Yuki entered her office. "We just confirmed it," he said. "You'll be speaking at the Global Business Ethics Summit in Geneva next month." She looked up from her notes. "What did they want you to talk about?" "Whatever you think matters most." She thought for a moment. "Then I'll talk about perception, how people see value in others, and how fast they forget it when money gets involved." Yuki smiled. "That sounds exactly like you." When he left, Jasmine turned back to the window. The city below was loud, endless, alive. Across the river, in Queens, Richard Blackwell was finishing another long day at the dealership. The office smelled like coffee and exhaust. He wore a cheap suit and sat behind a desk covered with paperwork. His phone buzzed, a news notification. Dr. Jasmine Carter to speak at Global Business Ethics Summit. He stared at the headline for a long time. Then he set the phone down and leaned back. The younger salesman at the next desk asked, "You know her?" Richard shook his head slowly. "No, I just know the story." He didn't say anything else for the rest of the day. At night, he walked to the subway instead of taking a cab. Nobody looked twice at him. Nobody recognized him. For the first time in his life, he understood what invisibility felt like. Back in Manhattan, Jasmine stayed late at the office preparing her lecture. The topic was simple: respect as currency. She wrote her opening line carefully. When knowledge meets arrogance, one of them always breaks. And it's never the knowledge. She paused, reading it again, then smiled. That weekend, she visited her mother. Dorothy was stronger now, walking short distances with a cane. "You going to Switzerland?" she asked. "Yes, just for a few days. They want me to speak." Her mother looked proud. "You see, everything you went through had a reason." "Maybe," Jasmine said. "Or maybe I just refused to stay down." Dorothy nodded. "That's enough reason." They ate dinner quietly. The news played in the background. A small segment mentioned the bankruptcy proceedings of Blackwell Properties. Final liquidation, no appeal. Jasmine didn't react. She just kept eating. That night, before going to bed, she sat by the window again. She remembered the sound of Richard's voice, the laughter of the crowd, the way she had stood holding that tray. Then she remembered what came after. The silence, the truth, the power of knowing she had nothing left to lose. Her mother called from the other room. "You okay, baby?" "I'm fine," Jasmine said. And she meant it. A week later, she boarded a flight to Geneva. The organizers met her at the airport, escorted her to a hotel overlooking the lake. The next morning, she stood behind the podium as hundreds of people took their seats. She began without introduction. 6 months ago, someone tried to measure my worth with money. Tonight, I'd like to talk about how easily we forget that worth isn't a transaction. It's behavior. The hall was silent. Every word she spoke landed the way she intended. Calm, precise, unfiltered. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet. Some clapped. Others simply nodded in quiet respect. Afterward, a reporter approached her backstage. "Dr. Carter, do you ever think about that night at the restaurant?" "Sometimes," she said, "but not for revenge. For perspective." "What do you mean by that?" "It reminds me that what people try to use against you can end up defining them. Not you." The reporter lowered her microphone. "That's powerful." "It's just true," Jasmine said. "And truth doesn't need decoration." That evening, as her plane lifted off from Geneva, she looked out the window at the city lights fading below. For the first time in years, her mind was quiet. She thought of her mother sleeping peacefully at home, of her students, of the hundreds of young women who had written to her after the video went viral. Women who said her story made them believe in themselves again. The flight attendant passed by and asked softly, "Dr. Carter, would you like anything to drink?" Jasmine smiled politely. "Just water, thank you." As she took a sip, she remembered something her mother once told her when everything had fallen apart. "What's yours will find its way back when you're ready to hold it again." This time, Jasmine believed it. The plane kept moving east through the night sky. Quiet, steady, and certain. Columbia University, 1 year later. The lecture hall was full 30 minutes before the session began. Students filled every seat, some even sitting on the stairs. Professors stood at the back. Cameras were set up along the sidewalls. The screen at the front read, "Guest speaker, Dr. Jasmine Carter, respect as currency." When she walked in, the room went silent. She wore a plain black suit, no jewelry, no theatrics. The same calm energy that once silenced a crowded restaurant now filled an entire auditorium. She set her notes on the podium, looked around, and spoke in a clear, even tone. 1 year ago, I was standing in a restaurant, not a classroom. I was holding a tray, not a lecture script. But I learned more that night than I did in all my years of research. No one moved. Every word carried weight. I learned that knowledge means nothing if you let fear silence it. I learned that arrogance collapses the moment it's forced to face facts. And I learned that sometimes dignity is the only language people truly understand. She paused. The man who challenged me with $200,000 taught me something he never intended. He showed me that the most valuable thing in any room isn't money. It's composure. A student near the front raised a hand. "Dr. Carter, were you angry that night?" Jasmine thought for a moment. "No. Anger would have made me lose control. I was focused." "That's different." Another student asked, "Would you do it again?" "Yes," she said simply. "Not for the money, for the lesson." She stepped away from the podium and looked directly at the students. Every one of you will face a moment where someone tries to decide your worth for you. When that happens, don't argue, don't beg. Show them who you are through what you know. That's the only answer that lasts. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds, then applause began, slow at first, then building until everyone was on their feet. Jasmine nodded once in acknowledgement. Thank you. Now let's begin today's real lecture. The screen behind her changed to a slide titled Language and Power Dynamics in Modern Society. She taught for 90 minutes straight, precise, practical, no unnecessary words. Students took notes furiously. Professors listened. The energy in the room was focus, not awe, exactly how she wanted it. When it was over, she gathered her notes, thanked everyone, and walked out through the side door. Outside, the campus was quiet. She passed by the old faculty offices where she used to work. Nothing had changed, but everything had. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother. Proud of you. She smiled and typed back, I'm coming home soon. As she walked toward the gate, a group of students approached her. One of them, a young woman, said softly, Dr. Carter, I just wanted to say your story kept me from quitting school. Jasmine nodded. Good. That already did something useful. The student smiled. You make it sound simple. It isn't simple, Jasmine said, but it's possible. They thanked her and left. She stood there for a moment, watching them disappear into the crowd. The sun was low now, the city noise faint in the distance. Jasmine adjusted the strap of her bag and started walking. At that same hour, in Queens, Richard finished another day at the dealership. A customer had recognized him and asked, half jokingly, Aren't you the guy from that video? He didn't answer. He just smiled tiredly and said, Yeah, that's me. Back on campus, Jasmine reached the main gate. She turned once, looked up at the university's tall stone building, and exhaled quietly. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt balanced. Her mother's words came back to her. What's yours will find its way back. She whispered to herself. It finally did. Then she walked down the steps and into the street, calm, certain, and free.